Good evening, everyone. Welcome to WhiskyCast's Happy Hour webcast for a Friday night, the final Friday in January. Hope you've had a good week so far. I'm Mark Gillespie, and we're going to have a little bit of fun tonight. My guest in just a few minutes was Doug McIvor, the spirits manager and chief whiskey blender at Berry Brothers and Rudd in London. Before I bring Doug into the room, just a couple of quick news notes. If you have not heard right now, if you did not hear the news earlier today, the Spirit of Speyside Whiskey Festival has been postponed. Tickets were going to go on sale March 1st. The schedule was to be released February 24th. But it appears now that the pandemic is going to be with us a little bit longer and a little bit nastier than we had thought or hoped. And the festival board decided that they were not going to be able to make it work at the last weekend of April, first few days of May. So it will be held instead November 3rd through the 8th. There is hope that they will have vaccines in place and travel restrictions will be lifted by that point, and that hopefully we can all start to get together again. There have been other festivals changed and postponed. We will talk about that in a few minutes with Doug as well, because he's got a good handle on some things in Europe that I had not heard about yet. But we will also have some details on that on this weekend's podcast. Now, if you saw our show 2 weeks ago with the guys from the Off Track podcast, with James Hinchcliffe, Alexander Rossi, and Tim Durham, I would encourage you to listen to the latest edition of their Off Track podcast. If you've ever wondered what it's like after a whiskey tasting, well, the guys will tell you. Apparently, we forgot to tell Tim that you're supposed to sip these samples and not shoot them. And apparently it was fairly interesting the next morning after the tasting, but they get into that on their podcast. We also want to update you on some news that happened this week following that webcast, because at the time James Hinchcliffe had not yet finalized his IndyCar program for the year. That was announced this week. He will have a full season ride as Alexander Rossi's teammate at Andretti Autosport, a full 17-race season, 10 races to be sponsored by Genesis. Details on the other 7 coming later. And we want to wish him luck. We also want to wish Alexander luck this weekend in the Rolex 24 Hours of Daytona, where he'll be driving with the folks from Acura and racing this weekend in the 24 hours. That said, pour yourself a glass, add your comments to the screen at, if you're watching us on Periscope or YouTube or Facebook, we will see your comments. And if you're watching us on Twitter, don't respond to the tweet with this in it, because we won't see it till after the show. So we're starting to see some of your comments already. We actually have people that jump into the room 20 minutes before we even take the air. So, as Spirit Bomb points out, January the 281st, isn't it? Well, it sort of seems like that. It is officially the 29th. And let's bring in our good friend Doug McIvor, the chief whiskey maker at Berry Brothers and Rudd in London. Doug, how are you tonight?
I'm really good, thanks. Yeah, I'm all the better for seeing you, Mark, and all the better for being able to communicate a bit of whiskey love out to people in the United States, UK, wherever around the world.
We have folks watching from the UK, literally all over the world tonight. So even Norway, as Tor Christensen points out, because he is at a distillery in Norway, and Slancha from the Arctic, and he's drinking a Balvenie 12. Speaking of that, what do you have in your glass, Doug?
I've got some peated Ardmore 2009, one of our bottlings, and this has been matured in Lefroy casks, and I just love the semblance of Ardmore as a kind of peaty Highland style whiskey, and the influence of the Lefroy, and something that hankers back to my past growing up, which is teacher's whiskey, because both of my parents were teachers. So it's probably the first whiskey I ever tried in my life.
When was that? I seem to recall it being a fairly young age.
Well, it was. I don't know if you want a story
Oh,
like
sure.
that
Go ahead.
so early into the broadcast. But anyway, when I was a bairn growing up in Lanarkshire, which is just outside of Glasgow, my the early 1970s, I suppose. And at the time, there was an oil crisis that affected not just the United States and the UK, but around the world. And it meant that in Scotland we had power cuts, and we got quite used to it. But unfortunately, in January in Scotland, it can get quite cold, and I think it's going to be quite cold even in London, where I live nowadays, overnight tonight. But back in Scotland in those days, you got up in the morning and you had to make the fires to make the house warm before it got warm. And I had these two little pet gerbils, small desert rats in a cage. And I came downstairs one morning, and the two things were lying on their backs with their little claws up in the air, and they were frozen rigid. And I thought, oh no, this horrible situation that we have at the moment has killed my pets. And I thought, what the hell am I going to do about this? But my sister is about 5 years older than me, and she came down the stairs. And she looked into the cage and said, let's try something. So she went across to my father's drinks cabinet, and she brought out a bottle of Teacher's whiskey. And if you know Teacher's whiskey, especially the old days, they had a nice little cap on the top that you could unscrew, and it looked a bit like a measure. So anyway, she poured a bit of whiskey into that, and she went across to the cage, put her finger in, and dabbed it around the gerbils' mouths. So we sat there and we waited, and sure enough, after about 2 minutes or something, they started moving a little bit. I thought, okay, all is not lost. And then they started getting up on their hind legs again and moving around in their cage. And I thought, this is fantastic, And I thought, we've saved our gerbils, wonderful. And I didn't think anything too much about it for about another few days. And then we had another very cold spell. And I came downstairs one morning, and sure enough, the gerbils were on their backs again with their little claws up in the air. And I thought, oh no, we really killed them this time, because it was a lot colder. And I thought, but I don't need to wait for my sister. So I went to the sideboard and I got the bottle of whiskey out, and I poured some into the cap. So I gave some to the first gerbil and some to the second gerbil. And then I thought, well, it's bloody cold. I'll have one myself. So it was one for you, and one for you, and one for me. And by the end of it, it was just after Christmas time. So I had a Lego Wild West village set up on the sitting room floor. And I let the gerbils out of the cage, and they were running up the high street, and they were barging through saloon doors, zigzagging all the way up. And I had quite an interesting day in school that day, that's for sure. So anyway,
Do that today, they will call child services.
yeah. So, however, do not try this at home, children. If you're watching with your parents, do not try that at home. It was interesting.
Well, we have a question for you already from Chris Ratcliffe, because Berry Brothers and Rudd handled the distribution for Daft Mill, and Francis Cuthbert up there. Did you get a bottle of Daft Mill for yourself?
No, I never have. It's so tightly controlled, and it's done in such a kind of fair way. That the only time I've actually drunk any Daft Mill is at the distillery when I was up there with Francis. And I stay out of that side of things, because it's kind of handled by our marketing guys, just in case anyone doesn't know what I do. I'm behind the scenes most of the time. I do bulk buying for the company, but nothing to do with Daft Mill. So I think that the ballot there is perfect in the sense that it's fair to everybody. So whenever anyone else starts to sneak in and say, "Oh, I know Dougie McIvor," or "I know Mark Gillespie," or I, take a shortcut, there's no way of doing it. It's done in a fair way, which I think is the best way to do it because the production is tiny. The quality of the spirit is phenomenal good, and there's so many people who want a bottle, but I can't control that in any way, my dear friend. Or friends.
Using my name will not get you anywhere when it comes to getting the rare bottles.
Flattery will get you everywhere, but Daft Mill, unfortunately, I can't do anything for you, unless you bribe me extremely heavily, in which case the answer is still no, sadly.
So let's move on in your career from amateur veterinarian with your gerbils to getting into the whiskey business. How did you get into whiskey blending in the first place?
That was purely bad luck. When I left college, I went to work for one of the bigger carpet retailers in the UK, and I was involved in quality control and sometimes secondary quality control, which meant that I was sort of finding faults in carpets that come back from people's houses. So they'd be cut into, room shapes, and you'd be looking at it and thinking, well, it smells a little bit of too many animals or whatever. And I kind of got a bit fed up with the prospect of being stuck in that side of quality control for the rest of my life. And I decided to go into the wine and spirit trade. And it wasn't a bad move because I've been in that trade for 35 years now, I suppose. I'm now knocking on 57 years old. Went into it when I was the wine and spirit trade when I was about 22, 23 years old, something like that. And the moment I got into that trade, I was actually initially trained in wine rather than spirits. And I did my qualifications, studying wine, and a small part of that was spirits. And, my father and my stepfather were interested in single malt whiskies, and there'd always been something knocking around the house. And when they went to play golf or do whatever they wanted to do, they'd come back and the bottle was still at the same level, but my interest had sort of taken the level down a bit and then topped it up with a wee bit of water so they wouldn't notice. So I already had that kind of interest in whiskey from quite an early age. And I suppose it was this little bit of bad luck in a sense that I was moving back from the south coast of England to London. I'd lived on the south coast for a while, beautiful, but I was looking for a little bit of career progression, I suppose you'd call it. So I moved back to London, saw an advert in the London Evening Standard newspaper, which was for a wine company. And I phoned up and they gave me an interview, and I thought I was going to be a wine salesman. And I turned up at this place, number 3 Greek Street in Soho, which is the vibrant part of London. And I was given a job. But when I got there, I saw that about half of the business was actually given over to whiskey, so the Great Wall of Whiskey. And this was in 1990. And I thought, well, okay, I'll take that, I'll get on with trying to sell some wine. And if I can sell some whiskey, that would be great as well. and the company was called Milroy's of Soho. And I was there I was probably there for about 3 or 4 months, and there was a big bear of a man, John, Jack, as we call him, Jack Milroy, who I spoke to about 2 or 3 days ago. He's 87 now, but he was in his sort of mid 50s, I suppose, at the time. And between Jack, and his brother Wallace, who was a whiskey writer who wrote the Whiskey Almanac, between those two guys were very, very generous to me. After I got past the first 3 or 4 months, where Jack would come downstairs and say, "Who's that guy again?" And I work for you, Mr. Milroy. And so I got more and more involved in the whiskey side. So over the sort of 10 years or so that I worked there, they were very, very generous to me, became very, very close friends. Wallace sadly passed away about 4 years ago. Jack is still going strong, and still very tuned into whatever's happening in the whiskey industry. And we just became sort of lifelong friends, and we had so many experiences together, and some of it was life-threatening at some point. Jack's
some of it you can talk about, some of it you can't.
Well, yeah, Jack's way of saying things was, "Would you like to go and have a lemonade and a picnic?" And at one point, I ended up in St. Thomas's Hospital, as a result of that. But anyway.
But then, how did you make the progression into blending?
It wasn't for a little while later. After I left Milroy's, I started working for Berry Brothers and Rudd, and I've been with that company for almost 20 years now. And when I moved to Berry Brothers and Rudd, we had Cutty Sark as a blend, and that was the Berry Brothers created the blend back in 1923. Major Hugh Rudd and two of the Berry brothers sat in a little room at the back of the business called the Parlour, which is sort of hallowed ground in the building, historical building that we have there. And they sat down with a Scottish artist called James McBay for lunch one day, and they already had the concept of creating a light style blended whiskey that would be appealing to the London market and the wine consumer, something that wasn't too heavy or peaty or anything like that, a natural color. So anyway, James McBay sketched out a little line drawing of the Cutty Sark ship on his serviette at lunch and said, "There's an idea for you. Cutty Sark, it's a ship that's come in from, sort of sailing under a Portuguese flag for a while, recently come back into UK waters to some acclaim, and it was built in, sort of Clydeside." So that's how the Cutty Sark brand was created over, a wee lunch table in a small room at the back of our business in St. James's Street in London. And by the end of the 1960s, Cutty Sark was the biggest selling blend in the United States. So, it was massive, but as a family company, a small company, couldn't throw the money at the brand that, Johnny Walker was throwing, to the American market, or Chivas or Dewar's, anything like that. So gradually it kind of lost pace a little bit just because of out competition, basically. So we had that. And when I joined the company, my job was really just to kind of work in Berry Brothers' sort of new sort of spirits room in the shop, and try to sort of build up, the reputation of the company for stocking good spirits. And now I'm superseded in that fashion nowadays by a gentleman by the name of Rob Whitehead, who looks after buying from, whoever, could be Macallan, Glenlivet, Glenmorangie, whatever. And he stocks the shop and our online business with that product, across the board. And he's done a fantastic job. But on the other side of what my dear friend Ronnie Cox, who you know quite well, he was the ambassador for Glenrothes. Glenrothes was a major ingredient in Cutty Sark. So when we sold Cutty Sark to the Edrington Group a few years ago, 10 years ago or so, we bought from them the Glenrothes brand. And Ronnie was already involved in that, and he carried on as ambassador, selling Glenrothes around the world. But around about sort of 4 or 5 years ago, we sold the Glenrothes trademark back to Edrington Group as well. And so now we're basically we have number 3 gin, which is a super premium gin, King's Ginger liqueur, which is a fantastic liqueur that we created to serve Queen Victoria's son, Edward VII, back in 1902, 1903, designed to keep him warm while he was moving his Daimler motor cars around London in the day. And then we have the Berry Brothers and Rudd whiskies that we're selling now. So we don't have Cutty Sark, we don't have Glenrothes anymore, apart from in the UK, we're still distributing on their behalf. So we've kind of gone full circle. But I was looking the other day at a price list from 1911, a Berry Brothers price list, and we were selling things like 1885 Talisker and 1990s Macallan and very old Glenlivet, to our customers back in 1911. So it was the late Victorian period where Berry Brothers really started getting interested in whiskey. And I think the reason probably went back. I mean, Berries had been selling, cognac, brandies going back to the early 1800s. But because of the phylloxera epidemic that decimated the vine stocks in France towards the end of the 1800s, the merchants like Berry Brothers had to look somewhere else to find a replacement. And historically, Scotch whisky was quite sort of rough and ready, and wasn't the London gentleman's choice of something to drink. But they'd come a long way, with the invention of the coffee still. Was able to produce things more efficiently, cheaply, and with the art of blending that came around, probably back in the 1850s, 1860s, with companies like Sanderson's, and then later Dewar's and Johnny Walker, etc. It made something that was, a replacement in a sense for the lacking, commodity, which was, brandy, French brandy. So that's where the Scotch whisky really sort of had its sort of its boom years. And then, of course, at the end of the 1800s, there was a massive collapse because of the collapse of the Patterson Blending Company, who were the the flash guys driving their Ferraris back in the day, There might just have been very fast horses and carts, but yeah, that it put the industry back for a long time, really until after the First World War, until things started to recover during the 20s, and that was the time really when we realised that the US market was ripe, but at the same time it was a very, very bad time because you guys went into prohibition for about 10, 11 years, and
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
So what do you say to that, Mark?
well, I never said what I was drinking tonight, and since I don't have any of the current Berry Brothers and Rudd stuff around, I pulled a bottle of Glenrothes from back in the day when Berry Brothers still owned the brand. A 1995 Glenrothes with, John Ramsey's name all over it. That was bottled, I think, in 2010. And
Yeah,
tell me about working with John.
I to be honest, I didn't work very closely with John because that was more Ronnie Cox's bag back in those days. I was still really employed in the wine side of the company, but working with spirits. So Ronnie would be the guy to sort of pin down on that. But in the times that I spent with John, in the blending rooms up in Edrington, it was kind of looking at Glenrothes stocks, and at that point we were trying to introduce, I suppose, kind of a strand price point wise and quality wise, that was something more approachable to the market. So you kind of, I don't know, £30 in the UK, $30 in the USA, and €30 around Europe, and that kind of price point benchmark. And so we were coming up with select reserves. So I was working a little bit with Ronnie and John, and he was just a completely fascinating guy. I think the first time I ever met him, I was actually up there in the blending rooms, even before I joined Berry Brothers with Wallace Milroy when we were working on other projects. And he gave me a sort of, wonderful insight into how it's done in the blending rooms. In one sense, they have all of the samples surrounding them. They have all of the equipment, electrical equipment, that they can sort of dip into a glass and sort of read the strength, etc., etc. Things that I'd never been exposed to in the past. But at the end of the day, there was a bucket on the floor, and it was really about sort of sniff. And most of the stuff that they were nosing while they're going through the process, which is the same way that things have been done for years and years in the blending houses in Scotland, is everything is reduced down to about 30% alcohol. So you can immediately see the flaws in anything, once you dilute something. If it's really dull and musty, etc., it's easier to pick out on the nose. So everything was diluted down, and it was a very quick process of chucking one bucket, give the thumbs up, chucking the other bucket or whatever, and things were just sort of worked out that way. And that's the magic of the experience of guys like John Ramsey, who complete legend, as a master blender for Famous Grouse, Getty Sark, and worked around even. You say that Cutty Sark's a blend, Famous Grouse is a blend, but even Highland Park and Macallan, etc., and all of the other brands in the group, they're effectively blends, because you have to take one cask and make sure that it works well with another cask, And it's the same process. It's working through these different samples to make sure you keep consistency and quality in everything that you do. So I suppose when your initial question, when I started any blending with Berry Brothers, it was purely by accident. It was one night I was playing around with some samples of some of the casks that we had that probably would have gone into older ages of Cutty Sark, but they hadn't yet. So I was fiddling around and playing with old samples. Initially, it was Glenlivet and Glen Grant, and there were sherry cask samples, some good ones that we kind of rescued. I came up with a mixture that I thought this is so delicious. We have to put that to market. And at the time, we had a sort of a blended malt that had originally been a blend called Blue Hanger. And I decided, I'd ask the company if we could put this out because it was so good, put it out as Blue Hanger. And there was such a small quantity of it, initial vatting was about 900 bottles or something like that. And it sold out very, very quickly. And to be honest, it was far too cheap.
But you still sell Blue Hanger today.
Yeah, we still do. Yeah, we still have it, and it's kind of moved on. And the ethos behind it was always that it would be the best blended malt we could put out using the best casks that we could. So there was never really a kind of a pricing element, but it was just trying to prove to myself, our customers, our distributors that we could produce a really good blended malt. And it became sort of less sherried and more peaty over the years, etc. So now what we've done since we gave up Glenrothes, and this is where sort of blending really comes into the job I do, is that because we didn't have the Glenrothes Select Reserves anymore, we thought about how we would replace that. And we came to think, let's do something kind of regional. So we have Isla Reserve and Sherry Cask Reserve, Peated Highland, and Speyside Reserve. We've also got a sort of Irish Reserve as well now. And that will kind of, it'll change, dependent on the circumstances of the stock that we hold. But it was really just to sort of try and pin down some styles of whiskey that would be approachable in terms of price, obviously, and things that people would like. And the sherry cask and the Isla Reserve, they fly off the shelf. They're sort of great. So I suppose my job is to try to maintain that quality going forward to make sure that we can deliver that, and I'm nearly 57, I think I've probably got another 10, 12 years to run. So, there's a kind of a burden there, but fortunately I've got good colleagues working around me, so I can spit out some of the responsibility and educate a little bit. And with a bit of luck, we'll be able to, keep these good spirits going forward. So we've got this is what we call our classics, our base range. So they're blended malts. And next up from that, we've got what we call small batch, which is something we recently introduced. So the small batch whiskies, they're single malts, come from single distillery, but there might be sort of, 2, 3, 4 different sister casks put in. So they're all single vintage still. And, we're just trying to encapsulate a kind of distillery style there, if there is such a thing, because you get massive variances between, a certain cask from a different distillery. So a lot of these are sort of brother-sister casks. And, if I'm in the room with you, Mark, and I'm having a little, party with you, it's just the two of us. But the minute you get two or three other people in, it becomes an enlivened party. And that's very often what I find by vatting together, 2, 3, 4 different casks, even if they're sister casks, and they're very similar on the nose. But by the time you put them together, there's a real conversation going. So that's our small batches, and they sort of next tier up price-wise. And we try to make them just a little bit more generally accessible, affordable, and available. And beyond the next step up is the single casks. Everything we do, apart from our sherry cask, is not coloured. And the only reason that we colour our sherry cask is for consistency, because the wild variation that you get from sherry casks. And but I can get away with that, I think, with hand on heart, by saying that because of the European influence of the oak, the addition of colour to maintain a spirit caramel, E150A, as we call it in the trade, it's not bad for you. It wouldn't do any harm. All of the main blends have it in there to maintain consistency. And that's the only whiskey at the moment that we put spirit caramel into. But the rest of it, and we're moving up to where I was talking about the single casks now, single bottling casks. They're all natural colour, unchill filtered, and I have only sort of 3 real things that I look for when I'm selecting those casks. The first is balance, and I nose things at Cask-Strength first of all, and I actually taste things at Cask-Strength first of all, because sometimes we're bottling these at Cask-Strength. So I want to suffer the same way as the consumer would. If you're, I'm saying suffer, what I mean is enjoy, But sometimes these are extremely high alcohol, so you have to be a little bit careful. So I want to sort of nose at Cask-Strength, taste at Cask-Strength, then I'll reduce it down a little bit, and that's sometimes where you can see where things might be sort of slightly wrong to some extent. In the cask, you can sort of pick off notes, etc. And if I've got all of that right, then I'll go back to the Cask-Strength sample, and I'll just celebrate by knocking it back and saying, "Thank you, folks," But and then beyond the single cask range, we have our exceptional casks, which are older reserves that we've held on to for a while or paid a hell of a lot of money for. So there's really sort of 4 different sort of ranges, and beyond that, rum and gin and other spirits that we do. But I'm a little bit biased towards Scotch whiskey, being a Scot, even if they did kick me out when I was 11 years old.
And we should clarify this for Graham Fraser. Has Berry Brothers and Rudd ever considered owning and running a single malt distillery themselves? You guys did own the Glenrothes, and I know it was a joint venture at times with Edrington, but I know that BB&R did own the distillery, right?
No, we've as a company we've never owned a distillery. We owned the brand, the Glenrothes brand, and only for sort of 5-6 years outright before we sold it back. But really, Berry Brothers' ethos is that we are the link between the world's finest spirits and wines, of course, and the consumer. So the company was always very reticent about sort of outright owning distilleries, because just because of that ethos, really, that's the way that Berry's built the reputation over the years. A lot of people in the UK and around the world, they'll hear the word, sort of the name Berry Brothers and Rudd, and they'll think fine wine. And for many years, people didn't associate Berry Brothers and Rudd necessarily with spirits, despite the fact that we created Cutty Sark and we grew the Glenrothes brand, hugely. And, we've done a lot of different things over the years. But yeah, who knows in the future, it may come that we do something off our own backs, but not just at the moment.
Chris Ratcliffe has a question because Berry Brothers and Rudd has held a royal warrant for probably at least the current queen and well back through the royal family. How often do you get orders for whiskeys from the palace, and what whiskeys go over there?
We'll start with the historical side, in that we've been supplying the royal family with spirits, wines and spirits, probably in the old days more wines or fortified wines, going back to the time of George III. But the first royal warrant was for King Edward the Seventh, and that was granted around about 1903, I think. And since then, we've had royal warrants through Her Majesty the Queen, the Prince of Wales, continuously since then. And as for what goes into the royal cellars, I'd get a bullet in my head if I ever suggested, because that's their business, unfortunately. Yeah, so I can't divulge.
Fair enough. Ivan Stoller wants to know, what American whiskeys do you drink or other brown spirits? And on that note, our pal Robert Licorice at Ironwood Republic down in Texas says to say hello and that he misses seeing you. And I want you to tell the story about how you worked with the Licorice brothers to get the Texas legation bourbon for Berry Brothers.
Well, I'll answer the first question first. Over the years, I've been really interested in good quality bourbons and American whiskies, and I studied like an idiot, really, because I wasn't fully focused. But at any opportunity I got, I would taste what people put in front of me, which is the best way to learn, in a sense. So I'm ignorant by and large, but I know quality when it comes along. And historically, I came across brands like Blanton's and Maker's Mark, and they would have been sort of benchmark favorites. Some of the few bourbons that were coming into the London market, and then after that, sort of Pappy Van Winkle. But I think the most interesting thing that happened after that was a sort of resurgence of sort of new distilleries opening up, and that's when I met Robert and his brother, and they've been over to London a couple of times with me, with their lovely mother, and we've shared the odd pub lunch together. But I can't remember exactly how I became aware of what they were doing, but I was interested, and they started working with sort of heirloom sort of corn that I didn't really know anything about. So they produced an education to me. And there was a funny thing that happened. Obviously, their distilleries in Texas, Iron Root, we're talking about. And they were doing phenomenal stuff for two young guys, just into their 30s, experimenting with the heirloom sort of corns, different distilling techniques to create something that was, to me, very interesting because they produced such a astounding spirit within even 12 months, which is unheard of in Scotland. And obviously, a lot of it's to do with variance of temperature in the warehouses, through daytime and overnight, and, sort of cask forcing through that. But they've just been incredible. And one of the interesting stories about Berry Brothers, going back to the 1840s, it was for a while. It was actually the Texas legation. We rented rooms to the Texas legation before Texas became part of the United States of America. So we have a plaque on the passageway at the side of the shop stating this, for 3 years. This was effectively the Texas Embassy. So we have a brand that we work on with the Licorice Brothers Iron Root, and this is it's called Texas Legation, and it's all thanks to their hard work and a little bit of our history that we created something which is sort of remarkable. And guys, when you're next across, the pints are on me, and say hi to Marcia. So anyway, I'll lift a glass to you.
As I will, because the guys make some really good whiskeys down there, and Marcia is a sweetheart too, as well. And
absolutely,
never met
wonderful.
their dad, Marcia's husband, but I've had drams with all three of with both brothers and Marcia before down in Houston. Just really good people.
Yeah, no, treasures of the earth. I think they're always welcome in my company, and we've had some good fun.
And Robert says, never pass up pints at the Red Lion.
Yeah, but that's unofficially my other office. But unfortunately, at the moment, it's in lockdown, so we can't do it for a while. But cheers, Robert.
How are you guys coping with the lockdown? I know the retail shop is closed, right? But you're still doing online sales.
Yeah, I think. Well, we still do a little bit of retail where we can, but I mean, the positive thing is that the wine and funnily, I was talking to our sort of MW lead MW today, Mark Pardo, and he was just telling me how strongly various elements of fine wine business is going. And I was echoing to him, sort of on the spirit side of the business, just how positive it is. And we're just fortunate because there's an awful lot of, sectors and industry around the world. And obviously everybody's suffering from this. In the booze business, we're blessed. I always suppose that, when you're in hard times, it's easy to reach for a glass of something. We got to be careful as well, because we don't want people just reaching for a glass. We want people to reach for a glass and raise it with a friend. And I think that's the important thing, to sort of put out the messages around the world that we just need to stay in touch with people, and I think that's the beauty of technology nowadays, and talking to you, Mark, and all of your friends and viewers. And sometimes at the end of the day, I'm lucky. I've still got some human bodies and a very large German Shepherd floating around the house. That you might not be even in each other's faces, because you know what kids are like. They don't necessarily want to talk to a fusty old father or whatever. And the dog only comes to me to get food or water or let out, stuff like that. So it's really, really important that we remember who our friends are, and pick up the phone, Facebook or whatever, and just talk to people. And it's really kind of kept me going. And I have to, I'm going to be absolutely frank about this. I've suffered from depression in the past, and when you come out the other side of that, you become a sort of stronger person, and you're able to deal with things like that. So I think if you suffered that in the past, maybe those are the people who are slightly better placed in a sense to help people who are going through this horrible kind of thing that we're going through at the moment, and never be frightened to reach out to people, because the longer you lived, I suppose sometimes the harder you lived, but it's great that you can reach out to people. Don't be afraid to get in touch with people. You can get in touch with me if you want, spit venom or whatever. But there's a lot of people out there, and we're all trying to look after each other, and it's around the world. One thing I'll say about the Scotch whisky industry, historically, and we're lucky in that sense, is that even though we're competitors, we travel together when we're allowed to travel. We trade together because we need to create blends, and we trade together with single casks because we all want to have a sort of a broader base and different things that we can offer to our customers. And I think it's one of the most beautiful industries in the world. And because of the openness of the business, we stay friends. And I think that's a really incredible and powerful message to other industries around the world, that you can work together. You can compete. You can produce the greatest virus if you think. But when the world needs it, it's working together, and it's compassion and friendship that's going to see us through this pandemic. And it's going to be industries like Scotch whisky that sew us together as people around the world as we go forward.
It's a very important message, and thank you for sharing it and for sharing your story, Doug. I want you to explain for a second how you guys get your spirit, because Graham Fraser wants to know if you've benefited from access to good quality sherry casks for maturing your whiskeys. Are you buying casks of fully mature whiskey, or do you do like a lot of other independents and like the folks at Gordon and MacPhail and others do, and get new make filled into casks for you under contract? And then how do you mature those whiskeys?
Well, the honest answer is a little bit of everything. Over the last few years, we started filling more and more new fill make. So we've been sort of trying to patch in various elements of our inventory, and the best way I can describe what I do is really being a kind of head gardener of a big country estate, in a sense, where you're trying to come up with something that fulfills, something that will provide color, flavor, whatever for every season, to be able to, for various elements of whether it's the kitchen of the house, the gardeners, the people who work in the kitchens, to turn up at the top table with a variety of nice things to be able to put on the table to sustain the family, which is our company and our customers. So it's a bit of everything, really. I'm buying in the market mature stock, which is very, very expensive. And just got to be careful you don't buy over the market price. We're trying to fill casks. We're trying to bring in a more structured way of maturing those casks. So we're shipping in a lot of fresh sherry casks, So we're doing things that we weren't doing 4 or 5 years ago, but we're ramping it up now. And at the same time, with the product that we're putting to market, recently we decided over the last sort of 2 or 3 years, we'd sort of shift away from a slightly ad hoc way of just sort of this is the next cask, this is the next cask. We've made it more structured, so we're now trying to bottle in quarterly releases. So we're doing sort of spring, summer, winter, autumn releases, and we're trying to incorporate in each of those releases more and more diversity, and it includes so it's primarily Scotch whisky, but we're adding in New World whiskies and other whiskies. For example, I think we've got something to look forward to from sort of Scandinavia, for example, coming forward, and also rum as well. So we're sort of more outlooking in a sense, and as a fusty old Scotsman, I wasn't the first one to sort of pounce too much on wood finishes and that kind of thing. But it is much more important now to experiment and try these things. And I'm lucky. I've got a guy who works alongside me, Johnny McMillan, who's based up in Edinburgh, but we're in touch, every day or two. And he's looking after, sort of some of this program of finding new spirits, new whiskies from around the world, new spirits. Finding different casks to mature things in, and obviously I'm still sort of fully involved in selection, etc. But it's also important to have colleagues who understand this and can sort of push things forward for a new generation.
I know Johnny, and he's a good guy, and he knows his whiskeys. We have a couple of questions on that finishing front from you. First of all, what do you think about port finishes? And then Robert Licorice wants to know what your favorite casks are to finish in besides sherry.
Okay, well, port finishes. I go back to the early days where there was a young gentleman by the name of Dr. Bill Lumsden, who was really one of the sort of pioneers back in the day. And I was just purely involved in the retail side of things back in those days, and I was blown away with some of the stuff that Bill was doing, and of course over the years another.
Be careful, Doug. We'll never hear the end of this from Bill.
Yeah, I know. Well, and at the same time, just to put him back in his box, there's another rather nice gentleman called Jim McEvor, who knew his onions as well. And then, of course, Billy Walker and a few of the legends of the trade, and Richard Patterson, of course. And they were out there before most of the independent bottlers. Gordon McPhail have done some sort of wonderful stuff as well. Sort of early sort of pioneers in the independent bottling sense. And I was behind the trend, really. I was behind the trend in that sense, because I was a little bit more traditionalist. And if somebody put a gun to my head and said, "What's your favorite type of cask?" I would say a refill hogshead, because in my mind, through trying to sort of watch the spirits that we had maturing, I was thinking, all you have to do is leave the right spirit in the right cask for long enough, and you'll get a good whiskey at the end of it. But the world's moved on, and I have to move on with that as well, because it only takes a few maturation cycles, and I'll be pushing up the daisies anyway.
Yeah, you're making whiskey for your grandkids to drink. Realistically.
Yeah, of course. If I'm 57 in the summer, and I'm laying down whiskey now, that probably won't be mature until I'm retired, And that's just
Okay, wait a second, Doug. You've mentioned this 57 thing 3 times already. I'm older than
yeah,
you are, so
yeah.
don't rub it in, okay?
Yeah, no, I'll carry on rubbing it in as long as I like. I remember the first time that I bumped into you, Mark, and it must have been, I don't know, it was more than 12 years ago in
Paris in
Paris.
2008 at Whiskey Live, I think, was when I met you and Ed Bates.
Yeah. And yeah, you were chasing me around a hotel bar with a microphone,
Yeah,
just
we
making
loved
sure
that.
that, just making sure that I was pissed enough that I'd talk to you. And
Now, we got a good question here. A couple of questions from Whiskey Canuck in Montreal. With all the new distilleries opening up in recent years, how has that affected how you do your job as a blender? And how much time do you need to spend with a new distillery before you add it into the range of components you use in your blends?
well, it's a complicated one. We're starting to work with some newer distillers, and we're starting to work with other distilleries that didn't exist 10 years ago around the world, and this is really opening our eyes up. And I think I mentioned this earlier, that Berry Brothers is really about sort of being the connection between our consumers and the best producers in the world, and that's really what we're still trying to do. So a lot of it is really the answer is watch this space, and you'll see what's coming, because I think there's some incredible stuff coming. Pretty soon as well. And there are other opportunities at the moment where we're actually sort of doing new fill with very young distilleries to the point where we can, even perhaps dictate not only the barley strains, but yeast and cask type and various other things. So we're really looking forward. We're trying to think of things that will be more exciting going forward, and try to be creative at the same time. So I can't give away too many secrets at the moment, because a lot of it's work in progress. And when you're sort of early into these things, you don't know what's going to work and what isn't going to work. You've got to sort of invest and hope a little bit as well, and trust in the experience that you and your partners have in trying to sort of make something a bit special. But promise you there'll be interesting things coming forward.
On that note, what distilleries in Scotland do you consider to be very underrated, that people should really be looking out for their whiskeys over the next few years? Because there are so many that have come on stream, but so many others that we never hear about because they're not always bottled as single malts. Who are some of the underrated distilleries out there that we should be looking for?
Well, I've had a gun put to my head a few times in the past, and people have just said, "What are your two favorite single malts?" And the guys at Diageo still haven't sent me the check, but my two favorite distilleries are Kalila and Flynn-Leach. And this is just through, over the years, consistency of styles that I like. Yeah. So that's a personal thing. Looking around a lot of the newer distilleries, for God's sake, what they've done at Daft Mill is incredible.
Yeah.
And the quality of the liquid there. And that's something that we're closely involved with, in terms of distribution around the world on behalf of Francis. But apart from that, I think over the years, Aaron has done an astounding job, in a relatively short space of time. And now, obviously, there are two distilleries in Aaron. But from shaky beginnings and belief in what they're doing, I just think they've got so many things right. So I'm very proud of what they've done. as someone who spent an awful lot of time on Arran growing up, so there's some of this is emotional stuff. But I take my hat off to anybody who's prepared to open a distillery and put so much of their energy and life and money, obviously, into something that's a long-term venture. And the guys in England and Wales and Ireland and all over the world, where people are sort of seeing the potential of creating wonderful spirits. Might be biased as a Scot, and you might be asking me about Scotland, but really, it's a global community, and I think it's a wonderful thing because diversity is what's going to grow this business and keep it alive, and it keeps competition alive as well. Nobody can do things the way we do in Scotland, and that's largely down to climate, etc. And sometimes just experience and technology or whatever. But we've got to be very, very careful, that we don't lose that industry. We'll always look to Scotland at Burns Night or whatever to celebrate with the haggis, and everybody thinks of Scotland, whiskey. It's very, very easy for Scotland to lose that edge because there are so many people creating wonderful spirits around the world, wonderful whiskies. Friends at Ironroot, have done incredible stuff in a relatively short space of time, compared to distilleries that were opened up in the late 1700s in Scotland. So how do you play that? It's
You mentioned diversity.
I'll be enjoying drams in my dotage by the time that I've worked out the answer to that question.
Well, you mentioned diversity and great whiskeys being made all over the world. Robert Licorice wants to know what inspired you to age Irish whiskey in peated malt casks.
Yeah, well, it was I had a little concept, and I think at the time we were able to get some peated casks from what was then Cooley Distillery. And we came up with a little brand called Crinamona, which means with a heart of peat. If you translate it wrongly in Irish, it means heart of the bog, which might be less appealing. But it was a small batch, and we kind of ran out of stock, so it didn't roll further than that. But obviously, Cooley did the same thing with Connemara in the past. Which was a sort of peated expression, and I just thought it would be a cool thing to do, and given that a large tract of Ireland is given over to peat bog, apart from the fact that Irish whiskies traditionally, or in our heads nowadays, aren't known for their peatiness, I thought as a Scotsman, it might be worth just putting a little bit of smokiness in there somewhere. So that was my excuse at the time.
We'll end on this question from Sarah Devaney. Any advice on when an optimal time is to sell a rare bottle of 30-year-old Lafroig that I've been holding on to? Better to hang on to it or better to sell? I know what I'm going to say, but I want to hear what you have to say first.
Really, Sarah, the best thing in these days and ages is to sit down when you can with your best friends and drink it. That's what it was made
because that's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah. But it will go up in value, obviously. You can put it into an auction or whatever. Nobody knows when the right time is, but whiskey is made to be drunk. And I was given bottles of Black Bowmore back in the day, when it was released. And I wrote the tasting notes. I drank it with friends, enjoyed it. And I don't feel any guilt nowadays that I probably drank, £18,000 worth of whiskey in 3 or 4 nights, occasionally with my best friends. I don't, mind you, I'm lucky. I've never really had to buy a bottle of whiskey, as you can see from the shelves behind me.
Same here.
Yeah. We're in a place of luxury, and I don't abuse that privilege, and I don't drink whiskey every night. I appreciate what I drink, and I appreciate the whiskey more when I'm drinking it with friends or listening to some really good music. So if you're stuck on your own, just stick on the Allman Brothers and down it.
Yeah, the best investment I've always said that you can make in whiskey is to open it with good friends and make memories, because the memories will last and they'll never lose value.
Yeah,
but if your cat knocks over the bottle of whiskey, you're screwed.
Yeah, well, my dog's well able to knock over my memories sometimes. But
Especially as Tyrone Cote points out, during a pandemic, I can't think of a better time. We don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. So open up that sucker and drink it now, Sarah.
Yeah, well, that's it's your bottle. You do it what you want. Yeah, if you hang on to it, then at least you still got it. And if you drink it, then at least you drunk it.
Yeah, just make some memories and have some fun with it. That's guys like Doug didn't make that stuff and bottle it so that it could sit there and collect dust and be flipped and all that stuff. I got to imagine that when you see things like auction prices, where the auction markets today, you've got to look at that and go, what are these people thinking?
Well, the price of anything is the price of anything. I got interested in whiskey because I was interested in whiskey rather than investment, and I made a career out of sort of earning a living from just trying to bottle good whiskey. I'm not. I've never collected whiskey. A lot of people out there do, and I don't knock the people who do. I collect stamps instead, and that hasn't made me any money. At least with a bottle of whiskey, you can open it and drink it. What am I going to do with my stamps? Lick the back of them?
And Sarah says, "Thank you, great advice." So we will end on that.
Well,
Doug McIvor from Berry Brothers and Rudd, the director of spirits there. Thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you for sharing an hour and a half with us and sharing some of your stories, Doug. I really appreciate it. And Sláinte, my friend, I can't wait till we can get together and have a dram. Hopefully later this year in London at the Whiskey Show, but who knows, but soon.
I hope so, Mark. Well, Sláinte, and good health to all of you, and stay in good spirits.
And Graham Fraser keeps wanting you to write a book. He's said that a couple of times tonight. He thinks you ought to write a book about life in the whiskey trade. I heard that Jim McEwen's writing a book. So I think we'd love to hear your stories as well. Yeah,
well, I share the same philosophy as John Milroy. And said, if people give me enough money, I wouldn't write a book.
Yeah, writing a book is tough.
I did write a book once upon a time, but it was about 20 odd years ago. And I could wave a copy around in front and show you. But anyway, it was a modest effort. And it was really an introduction. You can go online and you probably pick up a copy for about $3 or $4, folks.
Oh, it's worth more than that.
It's Doug, worth more than that, but I'm very grateful to be able to go onto eBay and buy a copy to give to friends at Christmas time sometimes.
At least you don't have boxes of them left in the garage.
Oh no, nothing like that. I didn't get paid anything really for writing it.
Well, thanks again, Doug. Stand by for a second here, and we'll say goodbye to everyone and finish this off. Just to let you know, we will talk next week with Tullamore Dew's John Quinn, decades of experience in Irish whiskey. He is also the current chairman of the Irish Whiskey Association, so we'll be able to talk about that as well. Lots of whiskey news this week. not only the Spirit of Speyside Festival news we discussed earlier, but other things as well. Join us for the WhiskyCast podcast this weekend, and we will be back next week again with John Quinn from Tullamore Dew at 5 p.m. New York time on Friday, and we are working on other interviews for the weeks ahead. Thanks again for joining us. Take care of yourselves. Wear your masks, people. Take good care of each other. Be responsible in your drinking, and if you feel like you're having trouble coping, reach out and talk to someone, please. Like Doug said earlier, there are people who can help and who are willing to listen. Take care of yourselves. Have a great week and good night, everyone.